To 12 Central African time, coming to you live from Johannesburg in South Africa. Pakistan has announced it is ready to host talks between the United States and Iran in what could mark a significant step toward de-escalating the ongoing conflict in the Middle East. Pakistan says both sides have expressed confidence in its role as a mediator following weeks of quiet diplomacy. However, uncertainty remains over whether these talks will be direct or indirect, and neither Washington nor Tehran has formally confirmed participation. The potential negotiations come amid continued violence, rising casualties, and growing fears over regional stability, with tensions also affecting global oil supplies and key shipping routes like the Strait of Hormuz. And to help us unpack these developments and what they could mean for the region and the wider world, we're joined by Amir Bagherioromi, a South African Iranian independent political analyst and writer focusing on Iran, the Middle East, and global power dynamics. Amir, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us on Africa Update.
Good afternoon, and it's lovely to be with you.
You know, Amir, we've spoken about the challenges that's unfolding in the Middle East and, the possibilities. Now, Pakistan has positioned itself as a mediator. How significant is this development, and why would Pakistan be a credible go-between?
I think for the Pakistani government, this is, a crucial moment to showcase that as a nuclear power themselves, they have the credibility and capability to showcase themselves as an objective party in this entire conflict and contribute to the end of this ongoing Israeli-US war against Iran. We know that other countries such as Turkey and Oman were trying to play that role as an objective party. Unfortunately, however, the US side betrayed, diplomacy in those processes and decided to surprise attack Iran nonetheless. Now, whether there is any likelihood for these negotiations to take place, as an analyst, objectively, I'm not sure if we can really count on them purely because of the ongoing pattern of US's betrayal towards diplomacy, but purely because the Iranian side has shown that it is not interested in any negotiations whatsoever, especially now that it finds itself slightly having the upper hand as far as a war and economic strategy is concerned. So what we can do is just, observe and see which direction it goes. But for now, I think the Iranians are not interested in the talking.
Now, how much leverage do both sides really have at this stage of the conflict? You're speaking of the fact that now Iran seems to have the upper hand. But can we really just be holding on to that? Or is there a way to bring the US to the party as well as Israel to ensure that this war ends? Because in actual fact, it is a war.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Look, I don't think Israel wants the war to end. I don't think that was their position. I don't think that is their position. I don't think that will be their decision. They seem to be very committed to this war purely because it's not only a strategic war, but relatively a theological war for them. But for US and Iran, it's a different story. They have negotiated in the past directly and indirectly. There have been different times in historical points that they have reached agreement. So we can kind of assume that that kind of a negotiation is possible. The unfortunate part here is that US has betrayed these negotiations a number of times, and it has created somewhat of a trust issue for the Iranian counterpart to trust these processes. Now, I do agree that we really need to find some sort of a leverage on either of the sides to bring everybody back to the negotiation table, as difficult as it may be, purely because the entire global economy is affected by this negatively. And both US and Iran understand that they do not want another economic depression in the world, specifically one that they'll be blamed for by global economy. And I think it is that, faith in multilateral cooperation and globalization that they need to have in mind. We will also showcase both sides as, relatively world superpowers, that the two of them can come together and resolve this issue and rescue the world from, further damages as far as economic damage is concerned. But as I said, I'm not necessarily seeing the Iranian side being flexible enough to sit at the negotiation table, nor do I see the Israelis want this war to end, and neither do I see the US wanting to come up with a deal that might humiliate them from a foreign policy and defense point of view. So it's a very tricky situation.
Is it really about optics? If we look at the US and how they do not want to be humiliated by Iran, and at this point in time, the dynamics have changed because now the whole world is now impacted and affected. Should everyone be standing on the sidelines, or is it time that all the other powers or all the other countries stand up and say enough is enough?
I think that's what it will eventually come to. You're right. It should be about the optics, but it really isn't about the optics. I think it has become about, the US President Donald Trump's ego more than anything else. But I do think the eventual solution to this is everybody having to stand up and say that enough is enough to all sides involved. And by all sides, I don't necessarily mean just the US and Israel and Iranian side, but the entire Persian Gulf states and the neighboring countries who are allowing US and Israel to continue using their territories to assert these kinds of attacks on Iran. And European powers, global South, global North, they all need to really come together and tell everyone enough is enough. Otherwise, this will turn into a doomsday that nobody is really, wanting to welcome in their political economy.
Now, Amir, we've seen a bit of Iran strategy, so to speak, in terms of with the expectation being only to directly hit Israel, but looking at the almost the whole Middle East, and whether Saudi Arabia, Dubai, Oman and Bahrain. This was not expected. This is something that was totally different in terms of their approach to how they handle things to this particular point. Which countries or which leaders do you think would be able to bring all parties to the table? Is China? Does China stand a chance? Does Russia stand a chance?
Fantastic question. I just want to address the earlier part of your question. You mentioned that this was not expected, and I do understand because a lot of the global leaders spoke about it as if it wasn't expected. But when you look at the documented interviews with Iranian leaders for years, they have been saying that should America or Israel attack Iran, this will immediately become a regional war because of all the Persian Gulf states being stakeholders and investors in the kinds of technology and defense systems that are in the region, and that will automatically make everybody complicit. And I think that is important because it's not that Iran just attacked these countries out of desperation, but it's been really warning the entire world and the region that any further investment in American defense forces in the region will basically turn into a regional war. So for me, at least, it wasn't unexpected or surprising to see Iran taking that route because it had been warning the world for a number of years that this is what it will turn into. Now, which countries have the best, I think, role to play as far as objective influence is concerned? China can be a key player, but to be honest, I think the BRICS bloc really should come together and think about this situation, particularly because Iran is a BRICS member now, and there are a number of countries in the BRICS bloc that have showcased themselves to be relatively neutral and respected on all sides. I think South Africa can play a very positive role in that. China can certainly play a positive role in that, and perhaps a number of other countries from different regions, perhaps Brazil can come through and play a role. Canada, with the liberal posture that they have taken, and speaking of this new world order that they're foreseeing for the future, they can play a positive role. So basically, member states that have relatively been soft powers or middle powers in the past, they can come together as the new objective neutral forces that can bring everybody around the table and create a certain level of trust that all sides can feel comfortable with, and hopefully negotiate a ceasefire and an eventual end to the war for many years and even hopefully decades to come.
And just for interest's sake, Amir, we're looking at, we're speaking of Pakistan and how they've positioned themselves as a mediator. And then on the other hand, you look at India, where there is conflict between India and Pakistan, which has been a long-standing conflict, and they have a different view of what is happening. This is now India compared to what Pakistan is calling for. How do we read that?
Fantastic question. I think India as a member of the BRICS bloc has been playing a very interesting foreign policy game, where it really does position itself as a country that has the global South's interests at heart. But in the face of public, they are constantly cozying up to the Western powers. We know on the day that Israel and US attacked Iran, Mahindra Modi was in Israel, talking to the Kennets, and that was relatively strange. They are discussing potential military cooperations between the two countries and so forth, and that is exactly why find countries such as Pakistan having to find new allies in the region as well. They go to Saudi Arabia with a defense pact. They are continuously speaking with Iran and the US. I do foresee that these kinds of alignment and association, both by India and Pakistan, will only provoke both countries, and will, unfortunately, and this is not a fully informed opinion, but relatively uninformed from my end, but I do think it will contribute to the tensions between the two countries, as they seem to be choosing sides in this war as well, which, as you can look, it is on the opposing end regardless.
Amir, key demands or red lines for both Washington and Tehran going into any potential talks, what are they?
I think, if you look at the pattern of US demands, it's, the complete dismantling of Iran's nuclear program, limiting or dismantling Iran's missiles program, and so many other things. I don't think the US positions has been that consistent. I don't think they had a unified strategy when they came in. They've gone from full unconditional surrender to many other things. So the US sides, I don't know. I don't know what is it that I don't know what it is that is it. They redlined. They've communicated way too many things. But Iran's requests or Iran's demands are relatively consistent. They've showcased what is it that they need. They say that they might be willing to limit their nuclear program, but they will not limit their missile program. They will also not compromise on welcoming any more US troops into the region. As a matter of fact, they have asked for complete withdrawal of US security forces from the region, and a guarantee that no further wars will be imposed on Iran for many years to come. So Iran seems to have a strategy, a certain level of consistency in its demand. US, it changes quite regularly, and I think that is an indication that they are relatively desperate to get something going, but how they are going to go about it is still unclear. And I think the EU and other US allies are relatively frustrated with US's lack of strategy for a potential exit from this war.
And with that frustration, why are they
Hmm.
not calling them out?
I think they have learned that they are dealing with a bully of a president. You're dealing with a president that calls, his closest allies a terminology that is even hard for me to say on this interview. I'm not sure, if protocol or policy might work against me, but that's the kind of president you're dealing with: egotistic, a bully, and the Europe is unfamiliar with, having an ally that is this unpredictable. So I do empathize with them, but I do think that as a collective, they need to really come together and see how it is that we're going to move forward. Otherwise, they just have to embrace themselves and accept this for the next 3 years to come, because that is how long, the US is going to maintain its posture under Donald Trump, and it's just bad for global North, bad for EU. I'm sure it's embarrassing for all of them.
Yeah. Well, Amir, it's always a pleasure chatting to you, and hopefully we'll be able to speak further on this as with new
Absolutely.
developments. Thank you so much for joining us on Africa Update.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
That's Amir Bagherioromi, a South African Iranian independent political analyst and writer focusing on Iran, the Middle East, and global power dynamics, joining us on the line.